Have you ever witnessed a moment where just one sentence, one look, one attitude was enough to expose everything a person truly carries within them? On a seemingly normal flight, a polite black woman stood up to complain about the rudeness of the flight attendant, but in return, she only received snickers, contemptuous looks, and seemingly harmless words that were enough to make a person's heart ache. But if it were you being disrespected in front of hundreds of strangers, would you choose to stay silent and let things pass, or speak up to protect your own dignity? And more importantly, if they didn't know you were the new CEO of the airline they were serving, would they treat you differently? The moment the truth was revealed, the crew froze. The mocking laughter died. The once contemptuous eyes turned to horror. But this story isn't just about payback. It's about dignity, about courage, and about the choices any of us might face. Have you ever experienced being overlooked just because of your appearance? If this story makes you think of yourself of a time when you were misjudged, then join me on this journey of healing and awakening. If you love this kind of emotional, humane content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to accompany you in stories that touch your heart. The laughter drifted across the narrow jet bridge like a ripple of cold wind, quick, sharp, and entirely out of place. It wasn't the kind of laugh that came from a private joke or the kind you hear between coworkers who have spent too many long shifts together. No, this one carried an edge, a cutting edge, the kind meant to belittle someone who was simply trying to be heard. And the woman standing alone at the boarding door, hands clasped gently in front of her, eyes steady, breath calm, was the one they were laughing at. Her name was Dr. Naomi Ellis. But no one here knew that. Not yet. To them, she was just another tired black woman flying coach on a cold, rainy morning out of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, asking a simple question no one wanted to bother answering. The smell of damp coats and overbrewed airport coffee clung to the air. People were anxious, shuffling forward in uneven lines, tugging luggage over metal floor ridges. A jet bridge always had a certain sound, a hollow hum beneath dozens of impatient footsteps. But this one felt heavier somehow. The tension wasn't loud, but Naomi felt it pressing on her skin. She didn't flinch, didn't drop her gaze, didn't shrink beneath their smirks. She simply breathed, slow, measured, the way she had trained herself to breathe through far worse moments in her life. A few minutes earlier, she had approached the gate counter politely, always politely, to ask about a seat issue. Her voice had been calm, soft enough not to disturb anyone, clear enough not to be ignored. "Excuse me," she had said. "I'm so sorry. I'm traveling light today. Just a backpack. I was wondering if there was any chance I could switch to an aisle seat, or at least something closer to the front. I'm in 28B at the moment." She had smiled, warm, genuine. She believed kindness was never wasted, even if it wasn't returned. But Kyle Morrison, the gate agent, didn't bother looking up from his computer screen. Not until he sighed loudly enough for the entire waiting area to hear. "Ma'am," he said, dragging out the word like it tasted bitter, "we're full, and seats aren't a buffet. You don't just switch because you don't like what you booked." "I understand," Naomi replied gently. "I didn't book this seat myself. It was assigned at check-in, and I was just hoping." "Everyone's hoping for something today," Kyle cut in, still not looking at her. "Hope doesn't change the manifest." Then, finally, almost reluctantly, he raised his eyes, took one look at her hoodie, her jeans, her worn leather backpack, and Naomi saw it. The flicker of judgment. The silent assumption. This one can't afford more. This one can't expect more. This one isn't important. She had seen that look her entire life, which was exactly why she didn't react. "Thank you," Naomi said quietly, and she stepped aside. She always stepped aside, not because she lacked strength, but because strength didn't always require confrontation. She had walked toward the boarding lane, letting the faces around her blur into tired mosaics of business travelers, college kids heading home, grandparents clutching tote bags full of gifts. All of them unknown to her. All of them the reason she was here, blending into coach like any other passenger. Falcon Air, an airline that had once been proud, once been known for kindness and reliability, had lost its way. The customer complaints had been piling up for months. Delays, dirty cabins, rude staff, emotionless service. A culture that had stopped valuing people. And Naomi, newly appointed CEO less than 36 hours ago, knew one truth. Numbers and reports could lie. But people? People never lied. Not when they were tired, stressed, or tucked into narrow economy seats at the end of a long week. If she wanted to save the airline she now led, she couldn't sit in a boardroom and read spreadsheets. She needed to feel the reality for herself. Without title, without privilege, without anyone knowing who she was. So she wore a plain gray hoodie, old jeans soft from years of washing, sneakers that could walk 5 miles without complaint, and her hair pulled into the simplest bun she could manage. Invisible. Intentionally invisible. At least, that was the plan. But a voice from behind her broke the quiet line of thought. Ma'am? Ma'am? You're holding us up. Naomi blinked softly and stepped forward. I'm sorry. She moved with the line into the jet bridge, smoothing the front of her hoodie as she walked. The ridged flooring vibrated slightly beneath each step. Outside, rain tapped against the metal walls. The smell of jet fuel, sharp and familiar, wafted in through the open aircraft door ahead. That was when she heard it. The laughter. She recognized the voices instantly. They belonged to the flight attendants she had seen moments earlier inside the aircraft doorway. The purser, a stern-faced woman with tight blonde curls and a clipped tone, the younger attendant beside her, and a male attendant leaning lazily against the galley counter. They thought she had walked far enough not to hear. This is going to be a fun one, the male attendant chuckled. First she wants a seat change, now she's complaining about some old dude freaking out in the waiting area. She'll have to get over it, the purser said. These types always think the world owes them comfort. More laughter, sharper this time. Naomi stopped mid-step, not visibly, not dramatically, just enough to steady her breath. Inside her chest, something old and painful pressed forward. A memory of being 12 years old in rural Georgia, standing in a grocery store line while a cashier accused her mother of trying to use a stolen coupon. A memory of a college professor assuming she didn't belong in an honors course. A memory of a corporate boardroom where she had been asked twice whose assistant she was. But none of those moments had broken her, and neither would this one. She exhaled softly and stepped onto the aircraft. The cabin lights were dim, casting a warm gold tone on rows of gray seatbacks. People were still settling in, overhead bins thudding shut. Naomi offered a small smile to the man in the aisle seat she passed, and he nodded politely. She found her row 28, her seat B, middle, narrow, and, as she leaned closer, dirty. The armrest was sticky, the seat pocket bulged with trash. A faint sour smell rose from somewhere beneath the cushion. Her heart dropped, not in anger yet, but in quiet disappointment. Because this was someone's experience, someone's first time flying, someone's worst day made worse. And Falcon Air had once promised better. Before she could even decide what to do, a shaky voice drifted from 3 rows behind her. Ma'am, ma'am, please, he can't sit alone. Naomi turned. There, near row 31, stood a trembling man in his late 60s, skin pale, eyes darting in panic. His hands shook as though he were bracing for impact. And beside him, a young woman, his daughter, she assumed, quietly pleaded with a flight attendant. My father is a veteran, the woman said. He has PTSD. He can't be 20 rows away from me. Please. We booked together. The attendant shrugged. Manifest is set. Nothing I can do. Another small laugh from the galley. Naomi felt it again, that tightening in her chest. A mixture of empathy, frustration, and something deeper. Something that felt like responsibility. She stepped forward slightly. But before she reached them, Sheila, the purser, appeared, arms crossed. What's the issue? Sheila asked, though her tone showed she didn't care for the answer. Naomi looked between the purser and the frightened veteran, her own voice soft but steady. He just needs to be near someone who knows how to help him, Naomi said gently. It's not unreasonable. Sheila's eyes narrowed, as if Naomi had offended her personally. Well, Sheila replied sharply, he should have booked accordingly. Then she walked away. Just like that. Naomi stood still, composed, but her heart felt heavier. She glanced at the veteran again. His shoulders trembled. His daughter looked close to tears. And in that quiet moment, Naomi made a silent promise. She would not let this go. Not today. Not ever again. She didn't know yet how everything would unfold. How 5 hours from now, lives would change inside a beige conference room. How Falcon Air would never operate the same way again. How people who laughed at her would forget how to breathe when they learned her name. All she knew was this. The laughter they threw at her, it was the beginning of their ending. The boarding door closed behind the last passenger with a hollow thud, but Naomi could still hear echoes of that laughter, thin, sharp, almost metallic, lingering somewhere in the back of her mind. It wasn't the sound itself that bothered her. She had lived through far worse. It was the ease of it, the casualness, the way people who held authority in small doses sometimes wielded it like a weapon. She eased into her seat for a moment, letting her backpack rest at her feet. The narrow aisle buzzed with voices, overhead bins slamming shut, and a flight attendant reminding passengers to step out of the aisle. But her mind drifted back to 10 minutes earlier. At the gate, to the moment everything started to unravel. Naomi had arrived earlier than most passengers, as she always did. Years of traveling had taught her that airports were like small ecosystems, crowded, unpredictable, and full of tiny, revealing human moments. When she stepped up to the gate counter, she noticed the first sign of friction in the air. The man working the gate, Kyle Morrison, sat hunched over his computer, tapping aggressively as if the keyboard had personally offended him. His tie was crooked, his hair slightly unkempt, and his face carried the look of someone who had long ago grown tired of doing the bare minimum. She waited politely. "Good morning," she'd said, offering the kind of smile meant to make a stranger's day easier, not harder. Kyle didn't look up. "Boarding hasn't started." "I know," Naomi replied gently. "I'm just hoping to ask a quick question about my seat." A sigh, loud, theatrical, escaped him. "Flight's full." He still hadn't looked at her. Naomi clasped her hands together. "I understand. I'm simply wondering if there's any aisle seat available. I'm in 28B right now." Kyle's lips twisted into something between annoyance and disbelief. Finally, he looked up. The pause that followed was longer than it should have been. His eyes swept over her hoodie, her jeans, her simple shoes. A quick assessment. A decision. "No upgrades. No changes. No exceptions," he said flatly. Then added, "Coach is coach." Naomi lifted her chin slightly, not in pride, but in quiet resilience. "I'm not asking for an upgrade," she said, "just to check if an aisle is open." "Ma'am," Kyle said, leaning back in his chair, "if people want nice seats, they pay for them." He shrugged. "Did you?" Naomi had heard those words before. Different places, different people, same tone. A tone that assumed she was asking for more than she deserved. She breathed in through her nose, slow and steady. "This isn't about comfort," she said. "It's simply about—" A different voice cut her off. "Hey, Kyle." A man in a business suit approached the counter, rolling an expensive carry-on behind him. "Any chance I can switch to something closer to the front? I can't be stuck in the back today." Kyle's demeanor shifted instantly. A bright smile, a friendly laugh. "For you? Of course. Let me see what I can do, Mr. Jensen." Within seconds, he had moved the man to an aisle seat in row 9. Naomi watched quietly, not surprised, just resigned. When she stepped aside to clear the line, she noticed them, a father and daughter, sitting near the corner of the gate area. The father trembled lightly, hands clasped in front of him, fingers tapping out an anxious rhythm. His daughter whispered to him softly, her hand resting on his back. Naomi approached slowly. "Is everything okay?" she asked the young woman. The daughter looked up, eyes weary. "My dad, he's a Vietnam veteran. He gets really nervous flying alone, and they split our seats. He's in row 31. I'm in row 11. She swallowed hard. "I asked for help, but no one cared." Naomi glanced toward the counter. Kyle was scrolling on his phone. She knelt down next to the veteran. "My name is Naomi," she said softly. "Are you feeling all right?" His voice trembled. I don't like small spaces. Not without her." Naomi nodded. "I understand." And she did. Her uncle had been the same way, brave in battle, but forever nervous in the confined spaces civilians never thought twice about. She remembered holding his hand once during a short flight, feeling his fear through every tiny tremor. She turned back to the daughter. "I'll speak to them again." The daughter gave a grateful but tired nod. Naomi walked back to the counter. "Kyle," she said calmly, Is there any way to move Mr. Walters Hayes closer to his daughter? He's not well. He needs her. Kyle didn't look up. Everyone wants something. This is a medical necessity. He laughed under his breath. Yeah, everyone says that too. Naomi kept her voice steady. Please look again. Kyle finally snapped his gaze toward her. Annoyed. Impatient. What do you want me to do, huh? He demanded. Create seats out of thin air? He'll be fine. People exaggerate. Naomi exhaled slowly. Controlled. Grounded. This is an exaggeration, she said. His daughter is trying to keep him calm. Kyle waved her off. Look, ma'am, you can't save everyone. It's not your job. There it was again. That assumption. That dismissal. Not your job. Maybe not, Naomi replied softly. But it is yours. Kyle froze, caught off guard for a moment. Then huffed, grabbed the microphone, and announced pre-boarding like nothing had happened. Now, sitting in 28B, Naomi let that memory fade into the background as the cabin lights flickered. Her eyes followed the aisle as the last passengers squeezed past. The veteran Walter Hayes was now several rows behind her. His daughter Emily was a dozen rows ahead. Separated, dismissed, forgotten by the very people meant to care. It gnawed at Naomi. Not because of the inconvenience, but because of what it symbolized. Dignity had become optional, a luxury, not a right. She tilted her head back, letting the hum of the ventilation system settle her thoughts. Travel had always been a mirror of the world's smallest cruelties. A place where someone's worth was decided by the price of their ticket, the color of their skin, or the patience of the worker behind the counter. But Naomi had never believed in mirrors. She believed in windows clear ones, the kind that showed truth without distortion. She folded her hands over her lap, her pulse steady. Every part of this flight was giving her exactly what she came here to see. Not reports, not corporate summaries, but the human cost of neglect. The jolt came unexpectedly, a soft nudge against her shoulder. She turned to see the man in the window seat, an older gentleman with gentle eyes and worn brown hands. You all right? He asked quietly. Naomi smiled faintly. Yes, thank you. He nodded. Long day? She chuckled lightly. Something like that. I figured. He leaned back. You've got that look of someone carrying something heavy but still walking steady. Don't see that often. Naomi's heart warmed slightly. Human kindness. Even in small doses, it mattered. Thank you, she said. I appreciate that. The plane vibrated as the engines roared softly from below. The intercom crackled. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Naomi inhaled one more time, centered herself, braced herself, because deep down, she knew everything that had happened so far was only the beginning. Everything that mattered most was still ahead. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow as passengers settled into their seats. The faint scent of citrus disinfectant lingered beneath older smells coffee that had been brewed too long. Winter jackets still damp from the rain outside, and the metal tang of recycled air. Naomi Ellis sat silent in 28B, listening. Not just hearing, but listening in that deep, careful way she had perfected over a lifetime of watching people reveal who they really were when they believed no one important was paying attention. The overhead bins thudded shut in uneven rhythm. A child somewhere up front asked their mother if the plane was really going to fly in the rain. And the mother murmured reassurance. A businessman muttered about legroom. A college kid yawned loudly. Naomi absorbed all of it like brushstrokes in a mural. The truth of an airline was never found in corporate offices. It was found right here, in the way strangers treated each other at 30,000 feet. She knew that better than anyone. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin for departure. Came a voice from the intercom, and that was when Naomi saw it, the shift. The kind of shift people made when they thought authority was on their side. Sheila Dawson, the purser, snapped her fingers sharply at a teenage boy who hadn't stowed his backpack fast enough. Under the seat, not halfway out. Let's go. The boy flushed red and scrambled. Matt Collins strode down the aisle, fake smile plastered on, but annoyance dripping from every stiff movement of his shoulders. Brianna Bree followed a few steps behind, clutching her tablet nervously, eyes darting around the cabin as if searching for approval that never came. And then came the first moment Naomi knew would stay with her long after this flight. A soft thud, a tremor, a sound that didn't belong. She turned. Walter Hayes, the veteran, sat trembling in row 31. His hands shook uncontrollably, jaw clenched as though fighting back a wave of fear. His daughter Emily, trapped many rows ahead, kept twisting her neck to check on him, anxiety etched across her face. Matt noticed the trembling. He rolled his eyes. "Ma'am," he called to Emily, "you need to stay seated. We're about to push back." Emily's voice cracked. "My father's not well. I need to be next to him." "Can't help you," Matt replied. "We're full. Seatbelt signs coming on." Naomi watched as Emily sank back into her seat, guilt and helplessness settling on her shoulders. And Walter, poor Walter, pressed both hands against the armrests, as if they were the only things tethering him to the present moment. Naomi felt something shift inside her, a familiar ache, the ache of witnessing the vulnerable being treated like burdens. Her uncle had looked like that once. Same trembling, same faraway gaze, same quiet plea for anyone to see him. She inhaled slowly, as she had been taught in her youth. Don't let the injustice consume you. Let it clarify you. Let it sharpen your purpose. She pressed her palms together lightly, grounding herself. But the peace lasted only seconds, because Sheila appeared, and Sheila's brand of leadership made the air in the cabin feel thinner. She marched down the aisle with a clipped pace, pausing at Walter's row. "Sir," she said, not unkindly but not kindly either, "is there going to be a problem?" Walter looked up with eyes full of fear. I'm sorry. I just... No need for sorry," Sheila cut in. "We just can't have disruptions." "He needs me," Emily called from row 11. Sheila didn't even turn. "Then he should have sat next to you." Naomi felt her jaw tighten, not visibly, but in that small, quiet way that warned of a deeper strength building beneath the surface. "Excuse me," Naomi said gently from her seat. "He's anxious. It might help if..." Sheila's head snapped toward her. "Yes?" The word was a challenge, not a question. Naomi kept her tone steady. "He seems distressed. Maybe there's an aisle passenger willing to switch with his daughter." Sheila smiled tightly, the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. "Ma'am, with all due respect," she said, "it's not your job to manage seating." "No," Naomi replied calmly, "but it is yours." The aisle around them fell silent. A few passengers looked up. Matt snorted under his breath. Bree stared at the carpet. Sheila's cheeks reddened slightly. "Well," she said sharply, "since everyone suddenly thinks they know airline policy better than me, I'll make it clear. The manifest is locked. Everyone stays where they are. That's final." Then she turned on her heel and marched back toward the galley. Naomi watched her go, not with anger, but with something far deeper, the kind of disappointment that carried history behind it. She leaned back in her seat. The plane lurched gently as it pushed back from the gate. Rain streaked across the small oval window beside them, blurring the lights of the terminal. The engines rumbled beneath the cabin floor, and Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself once more. She had expected something. She wasn't naive. She didn't think one short flight would magically confirm the rosy image Falcon Air's corporate leadership had been painting. She knew there were problems, deep ones, but this was worse than she expected. Not because the staff were tired, not because they were overwhelmed, but because they didn't seem to care. Caring couldn't be taught from a manual. It wasn't a policy. It was a culture, and culture started at the top. Right now, the top was her. Soon, they would all know that. As the engines roared louder and the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, Naomi noticed Bree hovering in the aisle a few rows ahead, awkward, hesitant, chewing her lip. The young woman kept glancing back toward Walter, then toward the galley, as though calculating how much trouble she'd get into if she helped. Finally, she approached Naomi quietly. "Ma'am," Bree whispered, Do you need a wipe or something for your seat?" Naomi blinked. The question was soft, nervous, almost apologetic. "Yes," Naomi said with a small nod. "Thank you." Bree reached into her apron, pulled out a small packet of sanitizing wipes, and hesitated a moment before handing them over. She looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't know it was that dirty." Naomi offered her a gentle smile. "Thank you for noticing." Bree's shoulders eased slightly. But then, a sharp voice from the galley. "Bree!" Sheila barked. Let's go. We're not doing spa service today. Bree flinched as if struck. She hurried away without another word. Naomi exhaled. Not anger, not frustration, but clarity. This wasn't a crew problem. This was a leadership problem. And leadership, she reminded herself again, started at the top. The plane accelerated toward the runway. A moment of weightlessness lifted everyone slightly as the wheels left the ground. The cabin tilted upward, engines roaring like some enormous metal heartbeat beneath their feet. Naomi gripped the armrest not because she was afraid, but because she felt something shifting inside her. Something preparing, positioning, aligning her purpose with the weight of her responsibility. She opened her eyes as the plane leveled off. Her seat still smelled faintly of disinfectant and something sour. The hum of the engines created a soft vibration along the floor. Passengers murmured to one another. A baby cried briefly somewhere near the back. And in the midst of all that ordinary chaos, Naomi Ellis made another silent promise. She would remember everything, every gesture, every word, every dismissal, every laugh, not to punish, but to rebuild. Because Falcon Air wouldn't survive another year of pretending everything was fine. Someone needed to tell the truth. And sometimes, truth required you to sit quietly in a dirty middle seat at the back of a plane listening, watching, waiting for the right moment to make things whole again. That moment was coming, sooner than anyone on this flight realized. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a soft ding, freeing passengers to stretch, shift, or make their way to the lavatory. The aircraft leveled into its cruising altitude, engines humming with a deep, rhythmic steadiness. But for all the calm the sky offered, the cabin itself carried a tension that sat heavy on Naomi's shoulders. She glanced back toward Walter Hayes, who now sat pressing his trembling hands against his thighs as though trying to contain a storm inside his chest. Every so often, his head jerked lightly, his breathing shallow. The woman next to him looked away, uncomfortable, pretending not to notice. And his daughter Emily Hayes kept turning in her seat several rows ahead, her eyes full of helpless worry. The guilt of being unable to reach him weighed visibly on her. Naomi looked down at her own hands, strong, steady, but inside, her heart carried a slow, burning ache. This shouldn't be happening. Not in a civilized world. Not on an airline that once prided itself on compassion. "Excuse me," a soft voice whispered beside her. It was the older gentleman in 28A, the man who had noticed her quiet strength earlier. "I think," he said carefully, "that man in the back might need help." Naomi nodded. "I know. His daughter's up front? They were split. That shouldn't happen," he murmured. "No," Naomi agreed. "It shouldn't." The man hesitated. Then he leaned closer. "If you need someone to support you when you talk to the crew again, I can help." Naomi's heart warmed for a moment. Small kindnesses always mattered. "Thank you," she said softly. "But let's try something else first." She rose from her seat, stepping into the aisle. The hum of conversation around her quieted slightly as she moved. She didn't raise her voice, didn't make a scene. She simply walked toward Walter's row, slow, gentle, intentional. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly when she reached him. Walter looked up. Fear filled his eyes, fear that didn't belong to the present moment, but to memories buried in the darkest corners of his past. I'm sorry," he murmured, shaking. "I don't like this. I don't like it at all." Naomi knelt beside his seat, resting one hand lightly on the armrest, close enough to offer support, far enough to respect his space. "You're all right," she whispered. "You're safe. Your daughter's right up there." He swallowed hard. His breath came out uneven. "I need her," he whispered. "I know," Naomi said. "And we're going to try again." She stood and turned toward the aisle. And that was when Sheila appeared, as if summoned by the possibility of inconvenience. "Ma'am," Sheila barked, "you need to return to your seat. The aisle must remain clear." Naomi kept her composure. "I understand. I was speaking with." "I don't care who you were speaking with," Sheila snapped. "You cannot be out of your seat without a reason." Naomi paused, taking a slow breath. "This is a reason." Sheila's jaw tightened. "I don't make exceptions." Naomi didn't raise her voice. "I'm asking you to make a humane decision." A hush fell in the surrounding rows. Travelers watched with wary eyes, sensing the tension sensing something that didn't belong in a space meant for care and safety. Sheila stepped closer. Too close. "Ma'am," she said, through clenched teeth, "you are becoming disruptive." The word hit the air like a blade. Disruptive. The same word used time and time again against people who dared to speak up. People who didn't fit the mold of what authority deemed comfortable. Naomi inhaled once more deep, grounding. She knew from childhood that the line between being calm and being labeled was razor-thin when you were a black woman in America. But she also knew something else. Truth didn't need volume. It needed clarity. "I'm not being disruptive," Naomi said softly. "I'm advocating for a man who is clearly unwell." She gestured gently toward Walter, whose trembling had worsened. Sheila didn't even glance back. "I have 50 passengers on this flight," Sheila snapped. "I can't cater to every anxiety attack." The cabin gasped softly. It was subtle, barely audible, but Naomi heard it. Shock, discomfort, a shift in the atmosphere, as passengers realized they were witnessing something that should never occur in a place of service. Naomi kept her voice steady. "He's not having an anxiety attack. He is a veteran with PTSD." "Well," Sheila scoffed, "that's hardly my problem, is it?" Naomi's eyes softened not with anger, but with sorrow. Sorrow for a system that had allowed such coldness to grow unchecked. "You know," she said quietly, "it really is your problem." "What did you say?" Sheila stepped closer. Naomi did not move. "Your job," she continued calmly, "is to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone on this aircraft." "Everyone." Sheila rolled her eyes. "Spare me the lecture." A voice from behind Naomi suddenly rose. "She's right," someone called. It was the older gentleman from 28A. He stood, steady and resolute. And then another voice. "I agree." A woman in row 27. Then another. "He needs help." A man from row 30. The ripple spread down the aisle, people finally finding their voices. And still, Sheila remained unmoved. "Everyone sit down," she snapped. "Now." Naomi turned toward Walter once more. His breathing was erratic. He looked like a man trying desperately to hold himself together in a world that didn't see him. She spoke softly. "Mr. Hayes, would you like to sit closer to the front?" He nodded shakily. "Then, let's ask," Naomi murmured. She turned to the aisle. "Is anyone willing to switch seats so he can be near his daughter?" A man raised his hand immediately. "Take my seat." Then a woman. "He can take mine." People cared. Strangers cared. The only ones who didn't were the ones being paid to. But before Naomi could thank them, a sharp voice cut through the air. "No one is moving," Sheila barked. "Absolutely not. No seat changes mid-flight." Naomi felt the shift in her chest, not anger, but a cool, focused resolve. She straightened. "Then, I'll speak with the captain." Sheila's eyes widened. "You will do no such thing." Naomi held her gaze. Firm, calm, unshaken. "I will," she said simply. She turned toward the front of the cabin. Sheila stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, sit down." "No," Naomi said quietly. "Not while this man is suffering." The tension snapped. Naomi took a single step forward, and Sheila shoved her. It wasn't hard enough to cause physical harm, but it was forceful, intentional, and witnessed by over a dozen passengers. A collective gasp filled the cabin. The older gentleman in 28 shouted, "Hey, you can't do that." Someone else yelled. She touched her. Naomi steadied herself, calm as a still lake. But inside, a quiet, ancient fury awakened. The kind born not of ego, but of dignity. The kind that said, "Enough." Sheila froze, realizing too late what she had done. Naomi didn't raise her voice, didn't threaten, didn't rant. She simply looked at Sheila and said, in a calm, level tone, "I will be speaking with the captain, and you will not stop me." It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was truth. Sheila stepped back, color draining from her face. Naomi walked forward, her steps measured, steady, filled with an unwavering weight that came from one simple fact. She knew who she was, and soon, the entire crew would know too. The narrow aisle felt even tighter as Naomi walked toward the front of the cabin, each step slow and deliberate, her breath steady, her heartbeat calm. She wasn't angry, not in the chaotic way people often expected. Her anger was quiet, focused, a controlled burn that never leaked beyond her eyes. And in that silence, she had never felt more in control. Behind her, murmurs rose among the passengers, some shocked, some outraged, some whispering in disbelief after watching Sheila Dawson, the purser, shove a passenger for simply advocating for a distressed veteran. Naomi kept moving. Every fiber of her being had been trained, sharpened, strengthened over decades to handle moments just like this, moments when dignity was tested and humanity was on trial. She reached the small galley near the front. A curtain swayed slightly with the motion of the aircraft. Beyond it, the muted clinks of glassware signaled that someone, likely Matt Collins, was preparing drinks for first class, oblivious or indifferent to the tension brewing in coach. Naomi paused, steadying herself. Breathe in, breathe out, clarity before confrontation. But the curtain snapped open before she touched it. Matt appeared, eyebrow raised, annoyance etched across his face. "Can I help you?" he said, voice dripping with impatience. "Yes," Naomi replied gently. "I need to speak with the captain." Matt scoffed. "About what? Your seat?" He rolled his eyes. "Coach complaints go to the purser, not the cockpit." "This is not about my seat," Naomi said calmly. "Well, then what?" Matt demanded. "About a medically distressed passenger who has been denied assistance," Naomi said. "And about your purser laying hands on someone. I need the captain informed." Matt let out a low whistle. "Oh, you one of those passengers?" Naomi tilted her head. "What kind is that?" "The dramatic kind," he snapped. "The kind who thinks they run the show because they bought a $90 ticket." Naomi didn't blink. "I don't need to run anything. I just need the captain to be aware of a situation happening on his aircraft." Matt crossed his arms. "And I'm telling you, no, you talk to Sheila. That's the chain of command." Naomi let the silence hang. Then she said quietly, "Sheila is the reason I need to speak with him." Matt blinked for a moment, thrown off, but only slightly. Then he recovered and smirked. "You think the captain cares about whatever you're whining about back there? He's flying the plane, sweetheart. He's not your customer service hotline." Naomi inhaled slowly. Not out of frustration, out of choice. This was the moment she had anticipated. That moment in every failing system, where arrogance and complacency collided so forcefully that the truth could no longer be hidden. She didn't raise her voice, didn't lean in, didn't posture. She simply said, "Then I'll wait." Matt blinked. "Wait? For what?" "For the captain to be available," Naomi said, stepping gently to the side of the narrow galley wall. "I can stand," Matt sputtered. You can't just stand here." "I'm not in the way," Naomi replied quietly. "This space is not obstructed. I'm calm. I'm seated when needed. And I am making a reasonable request." Matt glanced down the aisle, searching for backup. Backup arrived in the form of Sheila Dawson, storming toward the galley, cheeks red with fury, her breath heavy. "What is going on now?" she barked. "I told you to sit down." Her eyes darted to Matt. "Why is she up here?" Matt shrugged. "She wants to talk to the captain." Sheila stared at Naomi like she had personally insulted her lineage. "Absolutely not," Sheila hissed. "You don't get to speak to the captain." "It's not about getting to," Naomi replied calmly. "It's about needing to." Sheila took a step forward, too fast, too aggressive. "You need to sit." A sharp voice cut her off. "Sheila." All three of them froze. The voice came from the doorway connecting the cockpit area to the galley. A tall man with dark hair flecked with gray stood there, Captain Ross Alden, the pilot of Flight FA-217. His expression was measured, stern, and unmistakably in control. "What seems to be the issue?" he asked. Sheila immediately switched mass authority, melting into sugary professionalism. "Captain Alden," she said sweetly, "no issue at all. Just a disruptive passenger trying to interfere with flight operations." Naomi didn't speak. She let the truth sit in the space between all of them. The captain looked at Sheila, then at Naomi. His eyes were sharp, not hostile but perceptive. "Ma'am," he said politely to Naomi. "What do you need to discuss with me?" Sheila interjected. "Captain, she is exagger." The captain raised a hand. Sheila stopped mid-sentence. Matt stiffened. Naomi spoke softly, clearly. I want you to be aware that a passenger with PTSD is in significant distress in row 31. He is separated from his daughter. They were booked together. He needs her near him, but the crew has refused to let anyone switch seats despite several passengers volunteering. The captain's face shifted subtly but noticeably. Naomi continued, "When I asked for help gently, your purser physically pushed me." A chilling silence fell. The hum of the engines filled the void. Matt swallowed hard. Sheila's lips tightened into a thin line. The captain's jaw flexed. "Is this true?" he asked, looking directly at Sheila. Sheila opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Captain," she's twisting. "Is this true?" His voice was flat, cold, the tone of a man who had seen pilots, attendants, and entire teams fall apart when honesty was not an option. Sheila sputtered. "I may have touched her arm, but—" "No," Naomi said quietly. "You shoved me." The captain stared at Sheila. "Go to the aft galley. Now." The purser's eyes widened. "Captain, now." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. Sheila turned and stormed away, but the facade she wore cracked with every step. Naomi didn't watch her go. She kept her eyes on Captain Alden. The captain exhaled through his nose, then lowered his voice. "Ma'am," he said, "I apologize. What you described is unacceptable." He glanced down the aisle. "I'll make arrangements for the passenger in distress. Give me 2 minutes." Naomi nodded gently. "Thank you." The captain returned to the cockpit, closing the door behind him. Matt stood frozen, caught between fear and irritation. "Well," he muttered, "now Sheila's gonna kill me." Naomi said nothing. Instead, she stepped back into the aisle, returning to her seat. As she walked, passengers met her gaze, some smiling, some nodding, some whispering words of gratitude. "You did the right thing. Thank you for speaking up." Someone had to say something. She acknowledged each with a quiet nod. When she reached her seat, the older gentleman in 28 leaned toward her. "You all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," Naomi said. "Thank you for your support." He smiled. "It's a rare thing, you know, to see someone stay calm under pressure like that." Naomi chuckled gently. A lifetime of practice. Before he could respond, a voice rose from behind them. "Is he okay? Is something happening?" It was Emily Walters' daughter craning her neck. Naomi turned in her seat. "The captain is aware now. He's going to help." Emily exhaled in relief, shoulders shaking as tension bled out of her. "Thank you," she whispered. Naomi nodded. A minute later, the intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, "we will be allowing a brief seat adjustment for medical necessity. Please remain seated while we arrange this." The cabin filled with murmurs, surprised, impressed, relieved. Moments later, Bree approached Emily. "Ma'am, please bring your things. The captain has approved your move to row 31. Emily nearly burst into tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She hurried down the aisle, brushing past Naomi. When she reached her father, Walter's trembling eased the moment he saw her. His hands found hers, his shoulders lowered, his breath steadied. It was a transformation born not from medicine or protocol, but from humanity. Naomi watched quietly, her chest tight, her eyes softening. It was the simplest thing in the world, and yet somehow, this airline had forgotten how to do it. She leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. The flight wasn't over. Not even close. And neither was the reckoning. The cabin felt different now. Not calmer. No. Calm was too fragile a word for what lingered in the air. What filled the aircraft was something heavier, something alive. A collective awareness. A sense that everyone had witnessed a moment that shouldn't have happened, and that something much larger was beginning to unfold. Dr. Naomi Ellis sank gently into 28B, letting the hum of the engines settle around her like a vibrating blanket. She wasn't tired. She wasn't shaken. She was simply aware, and awareness sharpened her senses. Across from her, the older gentleman in 28A adjusted his glasses. "You handled that with more grace than most people I've ever met," he said softly. Naomi smiled a little. "Sometimes grace is the only thing we have control over." He nodded, considering that. I hope they realize who they're dealing with. Naomi's smile faded, but not out of sadness, out of truth. They will, she said quietly. Just not yet. Down the aisle, Emily Hayes had taken her seat beside her father. Walter's trembling had eased significantly. Emily held his hand, whispering quiet reassurances. Walter looked exhausted but calmer, grounded. His chest rose and fell more evenly now. Sometimes humanity required nothing but proximity. Naomi watched them for a moment. The simplicity of it struck her. Something the airline had complicated unnecessarily. Something the crew had denied reflexively. Basic compassion, and that was why she was here. She let her gaze drift further down the aisle toward the galley, where Sheila Dawson now sat hunched on a jump seat, arms crossed so tightly they looked like armor. The purser's face was rigid, her jaw clenched, her foot tapping out a frustrated rhythm against the floor. She was seething, hurt pride layered beneath fear she wouldn't admit. But Naomi didn't look away because she wanted to watch Sheila suffer. Pain wasn't the goal. Accountability was. In the same galley, Matt Collins was quietly stuffing something into his pocket, a small chocolate truffle from the first-class snack drawer. Naomi noted it silently. Petty theft wasn't new in airlines, but it always revealed something about who people became when they stopped caring about the job that once meant something. And poor Brianna Bry Lopez, the junior attendant, stood there with eyes downcast, wringing her hands. She looked torn, conflicted, trapped between wanting to be decent and wanting to keep her job. Naomi saw the war inside her shoulders. A soft chime rang overhead. Meal service. The carts rolled down the aisle with stiff wheels and tired hands. Passengers shifted to make room. Naomi wasn't hungry. Not for food, anyway. She was hungry for truth, hungry for evidence, for understanding, for clarity. So she watched. She watched everything. Bree moved timidly through the aisles, nearly whispering as she offered drinks. When an elderly woman struggled to open her tray table, Bree helped immediately, gently, with sincerity. Naomi noticed that softness, the kindness trying to survive under harsh leadership. Matt, on the other hand, served with an expression that hovered between boredom and irritation. When a young mother requested warm milk for her toddler, he replied, "This isn't a cafe," and pushed his cart forward. Naomi felt her heart tighten. Not with anger. She didn't waste that emotion on people who didn't deserve her energy, but with a decisive sense of purpose. These were symptoms of a deeper sickness inside Falcon Air. And sick systems don't heal themselves. A sudden turbulence tremor rippled through the cabin. A slight drop, just enough for people to gasp, grab armrests, steady cups of water. Naomi calmly pressed a hand to the seat back in front of her. Turbulence didn't frighten her. She had ridden through far worse storms. What did frighten her? What had always frightened her more than any shaking airplane was the kind of turbulence that came from human indifference. A few seconds later, the plane stabilized, but the passengers did not. Because that was when it happened. The intercom clicked. A static crackle filled the cabin. "Captain, you there?" Sheila's voice whispered, but far louder than she intended. The wrong button. The cabin was hearing her private channel. Passengers sat straighter. Eyebrows lifted. Conversations halted. Naomi, still as glass, listened. "Captain, this woman, this Naomi, or whatever, she's stirring up the entire cabin," Sheila hissed. "She's making me look bad. I need her written up." Naomi closed her eyes slowly. Not surprised. Just disappointed. The captain's calm, low voice came through the speaker. "Sheila, your conduct is under review. Let's avoid escalating." "She's not even dressed like someone important," Sheila snapped. "She's clearly one of those troublemakers who thinks Google reviews control the world." Naomi straightened, not offended by the insult, but by what it reflected. A worldview that measured worth by appearance rather than dignity. Sheila continued, unaware the cabin could hear everything. "And she's recording us, I think. She has this quiet attitude, like she's collecting evidence. I want her flagged when we land." A ripple spread across the cabin. Outrage, shock, even fear. Someone whispered, "She's talking about her, like she's a criminal." Another muttered, "This is unbelievable." The captain's voice returned, firmer now. "Sheila, enough." But Sheila didn't stop. "She's a nobody causing chaos in coach. Coach passengers think they run the plane these days. If I had it my way, she'd be offloaded mid-flight. Gasps filled the cabin. Naomi didn't move, didn't blink. She simply existed in a stillness that came from knowing exactly who she was even when others didn't. And then, the line clicked off. Silence held the cabin hostage for several long seconds. Passengers stared at Naomi, some with sympathy, others with anger on her behalf, and a few with speechless awe at how composed she remained. The older gentleman beside her whispered, "You heard that, right? You're not going to let her talk about you like that." "I did hear it," Naomi said softly. "And I don't need to let anything happen." She looked toward the front of the cabin. It already did. He nodded slowly, realizing something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. The plane felt smaller now, tight with tension, thick with judgment. People murmured, glancing back at Sheila's galley, whispering indignation. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. But Naomi's face remained serene. She knew storms. She knew prejudice. She knew being underestimated. And she knew how to rise through all of it. She sat up straighter, hands resting calmly on her lap. This was no longer just an observation flight. This was a case study. A window into a failing culture. A moment she would carry into her leadership decisions. A moment she would not forget. The turbulence returned, small shakes, gentle dips. More sighs rippled through the cabin. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting the shakes fade into background noise. But beneath her calm exterior, an internal shift bloomed. One she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge until now. She wasn't just here to observe. She was here to begin. Begin the overhaul. Begin the change. Begin the part of leadership no title could ever prepare her for. She opened her eyes again. And that was when Bree approached her. The young attendant looked pale, almost scared, but determined. "Ma'am," she whispered, voice trembling. I'm so sorry. About everything." "You didn't deserve what," she said. "None of this was right." Naomi looked up at her, really looked. Kind eyes. Shaking hands. A soul trying to choose right, even while trapped in wrong. "Thank you," Naomi said softly. "That takes courage to say." Bry nodded quickly, tears gathering. "I don't know what's going to happen when we land. But I just want you to know I see what you did. And I wish I'd been braver earlier." Naomi's voice warmed. Sometimes bravery comes late. But it still comes. Bree inhaled shakily. I'll be in the back if you need anything." She hurried away. Naomi watched her go with a quiet sense of hope. There were good people here. People worth saving. People worth protecting. A system is never entirely rotten. Not when there are still hearts trying to beat correctly inside it. She leaned back, letting her consciousness expand beyond her seat, beyond her row, beyond her disguise. When they landed, the real storm would begin. But she wasn't afraid, because storms were where she thrived. And this airline, her airline, was about to learn exactly what kind of leader they had hired. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft began its long glide across the Midwest sky. Outside the windows, clouds drifted like sheets of brushed cotton, their soft edges glowing faintly under the sun's filtered light. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but soft. Passengers kept glancing toward the front galley, where tension simmered behind the thin curtain like a pot ready to boil over. Even whispers felt loud. Every small movement seemed to echo. And in the middle of it all sat Dr. Naomi Ellis, hands folded, gaze steady on the seat in front of her, her breathing even. From the outside, she looked calm. But inside, something profound was shifting. This flight had started as an observation. Now it had become evidence. Evidence she would use. Evidence she would never forget. The older gentleman in 28, who had quietly become an anchor in this storm, leaned closer. "You know," he murmured, "the way you're handling all this, it's remarkable." Naomi offered a small smile. "Sometimes storms show us who we are." He nodded slowly. "And sometimes they show others who you are." His words landed deeper than he could have known. Before Naomi could respond, a loud metallic clang erupted from the galley. Passengers jolted. Then came a voice, sharp, angry, unmistakably Sheila Dawson's. "I'm not the problem, Ross. You always take their side." The entire cabin froze. They could hear everything. A second voice, firm, low, belonging to Captain Ross Alden, replied, "Lower your voice, Sheila." "No." Sheila shot back. "This is ridiculous. She's blowing a tiny situation into a catastrophe. And you're letting her." Naomi didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. The captain replied, "Sheila, you shoved her." The passengers saw. "I can't ignore that." "She provoked me," Sheila snapped. "She thinks she owns the place. And now the whole cabin is turning against me." "That's because you're not listening," the captain said. "And because what you said over the intercom was meant for you," Sheila snapped. "Not for these people. And especially not for that woman back there acting like she's something special." Naomi's jaw tightened, not from offense, but from an old, familiar exhaustion. She had heard women like Sheila her whole life. Women who weaponized resentment. Women who underestimated her because of her skin, her calmness, her presence. Women whose weakness disguised itself as authority. The curtain rustled violently, and suddenly, Sheila burst out of the galley, face red, eyes blazing, her composure fully cracked. Her gaze locked on Naomi. "You," Sheila hissed. "You're the reason this flight is falling apart." The cabin fell silent. Naomi slowly turned her head, her expression serene. "I'm not the reason. I'm simply the mirror." Sheila blinked in confusion. "What does that mean?" "It means," Naomi said gently, "I didn't create this behavior. I only revealed it." Gasps rippled through the rows. Sheila's face contorted. "Don't play games with me. I know your type. Always causing trouble, always expecting special treatment." There it was. The truth so naked and ugly that even passengers inhaled sharply. One woman in row 27 exclaimed, "You can't talk to her like that." A man in row 30 stood halfway. "This is harassment." Sheila spun toward them. "Stay out of this." The older gentleman beside Naomi rose slowly, steady but strong. "No," he said, "we won't." Naomi placed a calm hand on his arm. "It's all right." He looked down at her, searching her face, and something in her eyes told him that she didn't need defending. "Not yet. Not like this." Sheila jabbed a finger toward Naomi. "You think you're going to get me fired, don't you? A nobody passenger getting people riled up?" Naomi finally stood. Her movement was slow, controlled, a quiet unfolding of someone reclaiming space that should have belonged to her all along. "I'm not here to get anyone fired," she said softly. Sheila scoffed. "Right. You're just, what? Some activist, some blogger?" "No," Naomi said gently. "I'm simply someone who believes dignity should never be optional." Her voice carried soft, warm, steady. It wrapped around the cabin like a calm tide. People leaned in. Passengers held their breath. Even the engine seemed quieter. Sheila stepped closer. "Well, guess what? This is my cabin. My rules. And you. Enough?" The voice cut through the cabin like a blade dipped in ice. Everyone turned. Captain Ross Alden stood at the front, staring at Sheila with an expression that held decades of leadership, disappointment, and resolve. "Step into the cockpit area," he said. "Now." "I'm not done talking to her," Sheila snapped. "Sheila," the captain repeated, voice firmer. That was not a request. Sheila's eyes darted between Naomi and the captain, panic flickering at the edges. She crossed her arms defiantly, but her feet began moving. She stormed past Naomi, muttering under her breath, "I'll make sure you regret this." Naomi didn't respond. She only watched her go, eyes soft, expression unreadable. The captain turned toward the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for your patience. We're going to handle this. Please remain seated. Your safety and dignity are our priorities." Passengers nodded, murmuring agreement. When the captain disappeared behind the curtain with Sheila, the cabin erupted in whispers. "Oh my God. I've never seen anything like it." She was completely out of line. That woman he talked to? She didn't even raise her voice. And then the whisper that carried the most weight. Who was she? Naomi sat back down, her breath steady. The older gentleman looked at her, puzzled but admiring. "You haven't reacted like a normal passenger. You've handled all of this like well, like someone used to being in charge." Naomi smiled faintly. "Perhaps." His eyes narrowed just a little. "You're someone important, aren't you?" Naomi looked down at her hands. A lifetime of resilience lived in those fingers. A lifetime of being second-guessed, underestimated, pushed aside. A lifetime of learning to carry power quietly. But quiet didn't mean invisible. And dignity didn't need to shout. She lifted her gaze again. "I'm someone who believes people deserve better than what they've gotten today," she said gently. "That's all that matters for now." The man nodded slowly, but she could tell he didn't fully believe her. Sometimes truth needed time to land. And time was running out for the crew. Near the back of the aircraft, Bree Lopez tried to keep herself busy, refilling water, checking seatbelts, but her hands shook. She kept stealing glances toward Naomi, not out of fear, but out of something close to hope, because she knew deep in her bones that Naomi wasn't just another passenger. She carried herself with too much intention, too much clarity, too much quiet authority. And Bry had worked long enough under toxic leadership to recognize when someone truly powerful finally stepped into the room. She whispered under her breath, "Who are you really?" In the cockpit vestibule, Sheila's muffled anger could still be heard: accusations, excuses, frantic justifications. But none of that mattered anymore. Because truth, real truth, always rises. And Naomi Ellis was done sitting quietly in row 28B. This flight had one more descent ahead, but the real descent was waiting on the ground, where names would be revealed, where accountability would begin, where an airline would change forever, and where Sheila Dawson would learn the lesson of her life. You never know who you're talking to, not until it's too late. The plane began its slow descent toward Colorado airspace, the mountains beneath them rising like dark blue silhouettes against the fading afternoon light. The cabin lights brightened slightly, a gentle signal that the journey was approaching its end. But for the crew of Flight FA 219, the real turbulence hadn't even started. Dr. Naomi Ellis sat with her back straight, her hands resting calmly on her lap. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even tired. She was ready, because this wasn't just a flight anymore. It was a cross-section of the culture she had inherited. And what waited at the arrival gate would decide how she rebuilt the airline. Across the aisle, Walter Hayes watched her with the quiet respect of someone who had lived long enough to recognize strength when he saw it. "You know," he murmured, leaning slightly closer, "I used to run a manufacturing company, 40 years on the job. And in all that time, I only met a handful of people who carried the kind of calm you do." Naomi smiled softly. "What kind of calm is that?" "The kind," Walter said, "that only comes from knowing exactly who you are." She looked out the window again, the sunlight catching the edges of her irises. "Maybe so," she said, "or maybe we all learn it the hard way." Walter nodded slowly, as if he felt the truth inside her words. "Regardless, you've been the only steady thing on this whole flight." Naomi didn't reply, but she felt the weight of that statement settle gently on her shoulders. Then a voice cracked through the intercom, tight, strained, forced into professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Alden. We'll be landing shortly. Please return to your seats and ensure all items are securely stowed. Cabin crew, prepare for final approach." There was something in his tone, a tremor of stress, not meant for passengers' ears. Bry Lopez glanced toward the closed cockpit door, worry tightening her brow. She had seen the captain's face during their confrontation. She had heard Sheila's meltdown. She knew something serious was unfolding. And she also knew instinctively that when they landed, the storm wouldn't end. It would likely get worse. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. When she turned to check the rows, her eyes met Naomi's. Not accusatory, not stern, just human. And for the first time in hours, Bry let out a shaky breath she'd been holding. "Miss," she whispered softly, leaning in just a little, I just want you to know, I'm sorry for all of this." Naomi looked up at her gently. "I know." Bry blinked, surprised. "You do?" "Yes," Naomi said. "Because I've been where you are. Where I am." Bry repeated, confused. "Under someone's thumb," Naomi said quietly. "Trying to survive in a structure that rewards silence and punishes conscience." Bry's throat tightened. She looked down, eyes burning. "I tried to do better today." "And you did," Naomi said. "You stepped forward when it mattered most." Bry's lips trembled. It doesn't feel like enough. Change rarely does, Naomi replied. Not at first. The junior attendant wiped a tear with the back of her wrist, then nodded firmly before returning to her jump seat. Naomi exhaled slowly. She wasn't here to break people who still had the capacity to grow. But there were others. Others who had chosen cruelty so consistently that accountability was no longer optional. And one of them was still behind the cockpit door. Inside the small space between cockpit and galley, Captain Ross Alden stood with both hands braced on the counter, his jaw tight. Sheila Dawson paced like a caged animal, her hair undone, her face flushed with indignation. She's manipulating you, Sheila spat. You can't honestly believe she didn't create this chaos on purpose. Sheila, Ross said, his voice low, you assaulted a passenger, and the entire cabin witnessed your comments. She deserved it, Sheila snapped. People like her always think they're being wronged. Always playing victim. Always. Ross raised a hand sharply. Sheila, stop talking. She froze mid-breath. The captain continued, voice cold and controlled. When we land, you are to remain in the galley until instructed otherwise. You will not disembark with the crew. Sheila stared at him, disbelief flooding her features. You're detaining me? For what? For conduct violating federal aviation guidelines, Ross said flatly. And for compromising passengers' safety. She isn't even hurt, Sheila yelled. Why is everyone bending over backward for her? Because, Ross said, and for the first time his voice hardened into steel, she's the only one who has behaved with dignity on this flight. The truth stunned Sheila into silence. A moment later, Ross added, you should start preparing an explanation. For who? Some supervisor? She sneered. No, Ross said. For the team waiting at the gate. Sheila's stride faltered. Team? What team? Ross didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because on the tarmac below, 2 black SUVs had already pulled up beside the arrival gate. Airport operations staff stood waiting in pressed uniforms. A regional manager checked her watch. And one man, a corporate liaison Naomi knew well, was pacing with a tablet, refreshing the incoming flight list. Sheila had no idea. The airline she thought she controlled for 5 hours was about to reveal who truly held authority. The plane dipped, the landing gear locking into position. The cabin trembled lightly as the runway rose to meet them. Naomi inhaled deeply. One slow breath, steady and grounding. Beside her, Walter braced his arm on the armrest. Something tells me this landing is only the beginning. Naomi nodded, her eyes half-lidded but intensely focused. It is. The wheels touched down with a low thunder roll, rubber kissing asphalt. A collective exhale swept through the rows as the aircraft slowed. But Naomi felt something entirely different, a sense of inevitability, of justice drawing nearer with each passing second. The engines roared, then softened. The aircraft drifted toward the gate. Passengers began to stir, not hurriedly, but with a strange, quiet energy, as if they could feel a story closing and another beginning. And amidst that quiet movement, a faint murmur spread. That woman, she was incredible. I hope she speaks up on the ground. Someone like her. She's not ordinary. No, she's not. I think she's someone important. Naomi heard it but didn't react. Her value didn't depend on recognition, but the moment of truth, the moment when the crew's assumptions would dissolve. That was something she carried with gravity, not pride. The plane docked. The seatbelt sign went dark. The doors unlatched with a mechanical sigh. And then, a firm voice echoed through the cabin. Passengers, please remain seated for a brief moment. We appreciate your patience. That wasn't standard. Naomi saw Bryce stiffen in her jump seat. She saw the captain step out of the cockpit, his posture straight as a blade. And behind him, airport security arrived. Every whisper died instantly. Captain Alden cleared his throat. Dr. Naomi Ellis, he said respectfully, would you please come forward? The passengers gasped. Whispers erupted like sparks across the cabin. Oh my God, she's a doctor. Wait, Ellis? Ellis? Isn't that? No way. That's the new CEO's last name. Naomi rose quietly. The moment had come. The descent was over. The reveal was beginning. She stepped into the aisle, steady and graceful, as rows of passengers watched her with awe, gratitude, and realization. Her past had taught her not to shrink. Today proved why she never would again. She walked toward the front, toward accountability, toward justice, toward a culture she would rebuild from the ground up. Because dignity wasn't a luxury, it was a standard. One she would defend with every breath she had. The moment Dr. Naomi Ellis stepped into the front galley, the air shifted, subtle but undeniable. The tension that had been simmering for hours tightened, as if the aircraft itself was holding its breath. Captain Ross Alden stood waiting for her, shoulders squared, eyes carrying a mixture of respect and regret. "Dr. Ellis," he said quietly, "thank you for coming forward." Naomi gave a gentle nod. "Captain." Behind him, the forward door opened. A blast of cool terminal air swept in, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant, coffee, and the distant murmur of gate announcements. Waiting on the jet bridge were several figures in dark navy suits and Falcon Air security badges. At their center was a tall, lean man in a gray blazer, his expression tight with urgency. Daniel Mercer, Director of Corporate Compliance. A man Naomi had worked with before. A man who knew exactly who she was. He spotted her instantly. "Dr. Ellis," Daniel breathed out, relief and alarm interwoven. We were notified of a critical incident on board. We didn't know you were the passenger involved." Naomi smiled politely. "I imagine it was a surprise. More like a shockwave," Daniel murmured. Behind Naomi, the cabin was still full, every passenger watching from their seats, eyes wide and unblinking. They had felt this story unfolding, but only now did they understand the gravity of it. Ross cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, the purser is in the cockpit vestibule." She refused to cooperate. Daniel's jaw tightened. "We'll handle her." Naomi glanced at the crowd of passengers. They deserved something: closure, reassurance, acknowledgement. She stepped slightly aside and spoke just loudly enough for the front rows to hear. "Thank you for your patience today." Her tone was warm, sincere. One woman in row 3 whispered, "She really is someone important." Another man murmured, "I knew she carried herself like a leader." A younger passenger mouthed silently, "CEO?" Before Naomi could take another step, Walter Hayes appeared from between the curtains, steady, tall, protective, without being intrusive. He walked toward her, stopping just short of her side. "If you need someone to speak to whatever panel's waiting out there, I'll do it. I'll give a full account." Naomi touched his arm lightly. "Thank you, Walter. But I think the truth speaks loudly enough." He smiled, a soft, knowing gesture. "You're a remarkable woman. Don't let this place harden you." "I won't," she said. "It's why I'm here." Passengers watched the exchange with the kind of attention usually reserved for movie scenes. Because on some level, they knew they were witnessing a moment that would ripple far beyond this flight. Naomi stepped into the jet bridge. The door closed behind her with a sharp hiss. And everything she had been holding inside, the patience, the composure, the hurt swallowed for hours, settled deeper into her chest. It was almost over, but not yet. Not until accountability met daylight. As Naomi walked down the jet bridge, Daniel Mercer walked beside her. "Security is detaining Sheila Dawson," he said. "We'll escort her last. She's refusing to surrender her badge." "That sounds consistent," Naomi replied calmly. Daniel exhaled. "What she said to you, what she did, it's unacceptable. And I'm so sorry." "You're not responsible for her actions," Naomi said softly. "But Falcon Air is responsible for the system that allowed them." Daniel nodded, guilty but determined. "When the board hears about this, they will," Naomi said quietly. "From me." He looked at her, eyes widening a fraction. "Dr. Ellis, are you planning to?" "Yes," she said. "This is not just an incident. This is a case study of everything we must fix." Daniel swallowed, because the words were true, brutally true. Falcon Air had a culture problem, and culture didn't slip, it rotted, unless someone cut away the decay. They reached the end of the jet bridge. The gate area was buzzing, airport staff whispering, security standing rigid, operations managers shifting nervously. A cluster of Falcon Air executives stood in a semicircle, waiting. When they saw Naomi, their faces went pale. "Dr. Ellis," the regional manager stammered. We didn't expect." "You weren't supposed to," Naomi said gently. Today was an unannounced audit. A collective intake of breath followed. And, Naomi continued, it revealed more in 5 hours than any quarterly report has shown in 5 years. One operations manager stepped forward cautiously. Ma'am, we are prepared to take statements, gather footage, coordinate witness. Naomi raised her hand. There will be time for all of that. But first, I want to hear from the captain. Captain Ross Alden emerged onto the jet bridge, his expression heavy but resolute. He took his place before the group, standing tall. Dr. Ellis, he said, I take full responsibility for the flight deck's oversight. I should have intervened sooner. No, Naomi replied. You intervened when it mattered. That's leadership. Ross's shoulders eased slightly. Then his eyes hardened. Sheila's behavior was out of line, completely unacceptable. She endangered passenger safety. She ignored protocol. She insulted a customer. And she intentionally escalated the situation. Naomi's gaze softened. I appreciate your honesty, Captain. Ross met her eyes. I would fly for you any day, Dr. Ellis. And I'll stand behind whatever decisions you make. That kind of loyalty from a man with decades in the cockpit carried weight. Real weight. Naomi nodded with gratitude. Bring her out, she said. Two security officers stepped onto the jet bridge. Sheila Dawson appeared between them, her hair disheveled, her lipstick smudged, her sense of control shattered. Her eyes darted across the sea of corporate suits, landing finally on Naomi. She froze. Not because she recognized Naomi from the flight, but because she recognized the authority in her posture. Something deep in Sheila's instincts screamed the truth. This woman was not some passenger, not a complainer, not someone she could bully or dismiss. This woman was the decision-maker. Miss Dawson, Naomi said calmly. Do you know who I am? Sheila swallowed, her throat bobbing. You're corporate. No, Naomi replied softly. I'm the person responsible for every crew member, every flight, every passenger, and I'm the one you mocked today. Sheila's breath trembled. Daniel Mercer stepped forward. Miss Dawson, allow me to introduce. But Naomi lifted a hand slightly, stopping him. She looked directly at Sheila. I'll tell her myself. The crowd stilled. Airport staff leaned in. Executives braced themselves. Even security seemed to pause. Naomi stepped closer, steady, unshakable. My name is Dr. Naomi Ellis, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. I am the new Chief Executive Officer of Falcon Air. The gate area fell into a stunned silence. Sheila's mouth parted, her eyes widening to the size of quarters. Passengers still exiting from the jet bridge froze mid-step, whispering frantically. That's her, the CEO. She was on the flight. Oh my God. No wonder. She watched everything. Sheila staggered back a step, her breath breaking into sharp, panicked bursts. No, you can't be. I am, Naomi said softly. And today, you showed me exactly what needs to change. Sheila's voice cracked. I didn't know I didn't mean I just thought. That I was beneath you, Naomi finished gently. That's why it matters. Tears spilled down Sheila's cheeks raw, frantic, filled with fear instead of remorse. Please, she begged. You can't end my career over one mistake. I've worked 20 years. This wasn't one mistake, Naomi said quietly. This was who you chose to be when you thought no one was watching. Sheila collapsed into a chair, sobs shaking her frame. Naomi turned to Daniel Mercer. Her voice was firm, final. Terminate her employment. Effective immediately. Daniel nodded. Security stepped forward. Sheila didn't protest. She had no fight left. Only the echoes of her own cruelty. As they escorted her away, her sobs trailed behind her like a fraying thread. Naomi inhaled deeply, feeling the weight, the grief, the responsibility of it all, but not regret. Accountability wasn't cruelty. It was the beginning of change. She turned to the board representatives and said, Now, let's address the system that made this possible. And with that, the reform of Falcon Air truly began. The conference room at Gate C-47 wasn't meant for drama. Gray walls, neutral carpeting, the faint hum of an overworked air vent, everything about it suggested boredom, paperwork, and forgettable meetings. But today, it felt like a courtroom, a reckoning, a turning point in the story of an airline that had lost its compass. Dr. Naomi Ellis stood at the head of the table, her posture quiet but commanding. She didn't need a raised voice or a polished suit to own the room. Her presence alone shifted the atmosphere steady, composed, anchored in purpose. Around the table sat Daniel Mercer, Corporate Compliance Director, Captain Ross Alden, two regional managers, Head of Crew Operations, HR's Senior Director, Airport Operations Supervisor. Some looked ashamed, some looked afraid, some looked relieved she had finally arrived. Naomi waited until the door clicked shut behind them. Only then did she speak. "Before we begin," she said softly, "I want to make one thing clear." Every head lifted. Her eyes moved from one face to another, slow, intentional. "I didn't come here to punish people," she said. "I came here to rebuild what we've allowed to break." The room exhaled, quiet, cautious. Naomi continued. "What happened on Flight FA 219 wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom, a sign that we've drifted away from who we're supposed to be." Her fingers rested lightly on the table. "So, today, we start our course correction." Daniel Mercer cleared his throat. "Dr. Ellis, we've detained Miss Dawson. HR is ready to begin formal termination procedures." Naomi nodded. "Good. But let me be clear, terminating one person doesn't fix a culture." The HR director shifted uncomfortably. We understand that. Do you?" Naomi asked gently, but with unmistakable weight. Silence spread. Because the truth was clear. They didn't. Not fully. Not deeply. Not the way she had seen it from the passenger cabin. Naomi folded her arms. "Let's walk through the chain of failures," she said. "Not to place individual blame, but to understand how this environment was allowed to form." She turned to the first regional manager. "Mr. Hartley, how many documented complaints has your region received about crew disrespect, inconsistency, or unprofessionalism?" He swallowed. A significant number, ma'am." "How significant?" "Over 300 in the last fiscal year." A murmur of shock rippled across the room. Naomi didn't flinch. She had expected worse. "And how many resulted in disciplinary action?" Mr. Hartley looked down. Four out of 300. Naomi's voice softened, not out of pity, but out of disappointment. "That isn't oversight," she said. "That's abandonment." Ross Alden closed his eyes briefly, rubbing his forehead. Daniel spoke quietly. "The union makes corrective action complicated. There are layers. Layers don't stop leadership from trying," Naomi interrupted. "Layers don't justify ignoring passengers, or allowing abuse, or enabling retaliation." The HR director finally found her voice. "Dr. Ellis, the culture among crew has shifted over the years. There's pressure, burnout, tension. The pandemic era changed everything." Naomi nodded. "Yes, it did. It created pain, stress, exhaustion, but it didn't create cruelty. That was a choice." The statement hung in the air like a held breath. Soft, undeniable. Truth, wrapped in compassion. Captain Ross leaned forward. "Dr. Ellis, if I may, many of us on flight decks have been trying to raise alarms. Not out of spite, but concern. Some crews operate with professionalism, but others," he exhaled, "others treat the cabin like their personal kingdom." Naomi tilted her head. "Why hasn't leadership intervened?" Ross looked directly at her. "Because they didn't feel they had support from the top. When problems were reported, they were buried." Naomi absorbed this slowly. "Then, it ends now." Ross nodded, relief settling into his eyes. The airport operations supervisor cleared his throat. "Dr. Ellis, there's something you should know." His voice was low, almost ashamed. "Sheila Dawson, this wasn't her first incident." A few heads turned sharply. The supervisor continued. "She had 4 customer complaints in the last 2 years, all marked as inconclusive. 2 junior attendants requested transfers away from her. 1 filed a report about verbal intimidation, but it was dismissed." The HR director went pale. "Dismissed by who?" The supervisor slid a file across the table. "Middle management. They said Sheila was too experienced to behave like that, and that the junior attendants were exaggerating. Naomi's eyes hardened for the first time, not in anger, but in resolve, a quiet fire, the kind that fuels change. Then middle management, she said calmly, will be reviewed and restructured. The HR director adjusted her posture, suddenly alert. Daniel Mercer added softly, Dr. Ellis, this may involve dozens of people. Naomi nodded. Then we'll start with dozens. She stepped away from the table and walked slowly toward the window, her hands clasped in front of her. Outside, the tarmac was a maze of movement planes taxiing, carts buzzing, fuel trucks weaving. It reminded her of how interconnected everything was, how one broken gear could disrupt the entire machine. She turned back to the room. Let's address the gate agent, she said. Kyle Morrison. The airport ops supervisor cleared his throat. He's suspended pending review. Good, Naomi said. But suspension isn't enough on its own. I want a full audit of gate training, customer prioritization policies, and passenger treatment protocols. She paused. And most importantly, the culture that decides who gets treated with respect and who doesn't. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. Naomi returned to her seat. Now, she said gently, let's talk about rebuilding. Heads lifted. A spark, small but real, flickered in the room. Because everyone there knew the airline needed something more than rules or guidelines. It needed direction, identity, heart. Naomi continued. There will be a new training program, non-negotiable. Every crew member, from junior attendant to senior purser, will receive training in dignity-driven service. She looked at the HR director. This isn't about scripts or forced smiles. It's about empathy, problem-solving, humility, and remembering that uniforms are not shields from accountability. The HR director nodded vigorously. Yes, Dr. Ellis. We can build that. And, Naomi added, we will bring in mental health resources for staff. Burnout, fatigue, fear, these don't excuse cruelty. But they do need care. The room softened just slightly, because compassion, when extended evenly, had a way of pulling people together. Then, Naomi shifted gears. And one more thing. Every head lifted again. Passengers deserve transparency. They deserve to know when we've failed and what we're doing about it. I want a formal public statement acknowledging today's incident. No spin, no corporate language, just truth. Ross took a breath. That's rare. For an airline. It's necessary, Naomi replied. People forgive mistakes. They don't forgive silence. Daniel leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. It'll change how we're perceived. In a good way. Naomi smiled. That's the idea. The meeting went on for another hour, refining plans, outlining the audit, identifying the broken links in the chain. But beneath the logistics, something deeper had shifted. Trust. Or maybe the beginning of it. Because for the first time in years, these leaders felt like someone was finally steering with clarity, with conviction, with humanity. And Naomi felt something too, a flicker of hope. That this job, heavy as it was, could become a place where people thrived. Passengers, employees, everyone. When the meeting ended, people rose from their chairs slowly, as if the gravity of the moment made movement feel sacred. Captain Ross approached Naomi last. Dr. Ellis, he said quietly, I've flown for a long time, served under 5 CEOs. Some good, some not. But none has walked onto a commercial flight unannounced. That alone says more than any policy ever could. Naomi smiled gently. Thank you, Captain. Ross hesitated, then added, I hope this airline is ready for you. Naomi looked around the room, leaders gathering their notes, faces thoughtful, determined. So do I, she said softly. Because I'm not slowing down. Ross chuckled. God help the ones who underestimate you. They already did, Naomi replied. Today proved why they shouldn't. As she gathered her notebook, Daniel stepped beside her. Dr. Ellis, do you want an escort to your car? No, she said with a small smile. I'll walk. He nodded respectfully. Then I'll have updates for you by morning. I'll expect them, she said. Naomi left the room calm, composed, steady as the heartbeat of the change she intended to bring. Her footsteps echoed softly in the hallway. Not heavy, not rushed, purposeful. Because today was not the end of the story. It was the beginning, the first chapter in the rebuilding of an airline. The first step toward dignity in every seat. The first moment where silence became action. And Naomi Ellis, the woman once dismissed on a plane, was the one rewriting everything. The next morning, Denver International Airport woke earlier than usual. At 5:30 a.m., the terminal buzzed with its usual mix of travelers, families tugging suitcases, business commuters with coffee in hand, elderly couples leaning on one another as they navigated the security line. The world outside felt ordinary. But inside the Falcon Air corporate office on the mezzanine level, a storm was gathering, one born not of chaos, but of truth finally breaking free. Dr. Naomi Ellis stepped out of the elevator, wearing a simple charcoal blazer, dark jeans, and a white blouse. Her hair was pulled back neatly, but not rigidly. Her face calm, though behind her eyes, you could feel the weight of everything she had set in motion. Today was not about confrontation. It was about accountability meeting daylight. And the world was about to see what had happened on Flight FA 219. Daniel Mercer was already waiting outside the conference room, a tablet in his hands, its screen filled with notifications. "Dr. Ellis," he said, "you'll want to see this." She took the tablet. The headlines stared back at her like spotlights. Passenger records shocking discrimination on Falcon Air flight. Black woman, harassed by senior purser Airline yet to respond. Witnesses speak out after chaos on FA 219. Who is the woman in row 28B? Some articles blurred her face. Some speculated wildly. Some tried to guess her identity. Naomi scrolled slowly, then handed the tablet back. "Is this from passengers?" she asked. "Mostly," Daniel said. Several passengers posted their accounts online. The footage didn't capture every detail, but the testimonies are consistent. The public reaction is significant. "How significant?" Naomi asked. Daniel inhaled. "You're trending across 3 platforms." Naomi blinked, once a mix of disbelief and resignation. "I didn't want attention," she murmured. "Sometimes truth doesn't wait for permission." Daniel replied gently. She nodded. "Show me the official report draft," she said. Daniel led her inside the conference room, where the PR team sat with laptops open, their faces pale. Naomi took a seat at the head of the table. "Read it." The PR director cleared her throat nervously. "Dr. Ellis, we wrote a preliminary statement. It's, conservative. Let's hear it." She began reading. "Falcon Air is aware of an incident aboard Flight FA 219. We are reviewing internal procedures and—" "No," Naomi said softly. "Stop." Everyone froze. "That's corporate evasion, not transparency." The PR director swallowed. "We were trying to avoid legal exposure." "Legal exposure comes from dishonesty," Naomi replied. She leaned forward, her voice low but alive with conviction. "We tell the truth, all of it. People deserve to know who we are and who we plan to become." Daniel watched her with quiet admiration. The team listened closely. "Let me dictate," Naomi said. The PR director placed her fingers on the keyboard. "Ready." Naomi began. "Yesterday, a passenger on Flight FA 219 experienced discrimination, neglect, and humiliation at the hands of our own employees. What happened was unacceptable. It does not reflect our values, and it cannot be excused." The director typed rapidly. Naomi continued. "I was that passenger." Around the table, shoulders stiffened, breaths caught. Naomi's tone grew steadier. "I saw firsthand what our customers endure when compassion is treated as optional. I saw how inconsistency, burnout, and arrogance can grow into something far more dangerous. And I will not allow it to continue." Her words were soft, but carried the weight of a hammer. The PR team stared at her, stunned. "That is our statement," Naomi said. "Dr. Ellis," the PR director whispered. This level of candor, companies don't do this." "We aren't companies," Naomi replied. "We're people, and people earn trust through honesty." As she stood, Daniel gave her a small nod of respect. "You just changed the playbook," he said. "No," Naomi said. "I'm rewriting it." After leaving the conference room, Naomi walked toward her office, a space she hadn't yet occupied since taking the CEO position. Her keycard beeped softly as she entered. The office was minimalist, clean lines, a wide window overlooking the concourse, a long oak desk, and two chairs facing it, a coat stand, a shelf with exactly one framed photo of Falcon Air's first aircraft. Her gaze drifted to the window. Passengers moved below like rivers merging and parting. Different faces, different stories, all temporarily passing through a shared space just like her yesterday. And unexpectedly, she felt a heaviness settle in her chest. Not regret, not fear, something deeper. A soft, quiet ache, as if confronting yesterday's cruelty had reopened an older wound, one she'd stitched up long ago but never fully healed. The ache of being dismissed. The ache of being underestimated. The ache of being seen as less. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't Dr. Ellis. She wasn't the CEO. She wasn't the calm force holding an airline's future together. For a moment, she was simply Naomi, a black woman who had fought her entire life to earn a seat at tables built to exclude her. And now she was leading one. A knock at the door broke her reverie. "Come in," she said. Bri Lopez stepped inside, her movements tentative. She still wore her uniform, though her hands fidgeted nervously at her sides. "Miss Dr. Ellis, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be here without authorization. I needed to see you." Naomi smiled softly. "It's all right, Bree. Sit." Bree perched at the edge of the chair, eyes glassy with fatigue. "I saw the news," she whispered. "Everyone's talking about the flight. About you. About what happened. I didn't expect any of this." "Neither did I," Naomi replied gently. Bree swallowed hard, her voice trembling. Did I ruin everything? I tried to do better at the end, but I should have helped earlier. I should have said something when Sheila was being unfair. I should have." "Bree," Naomi said softly, "look at me." The younger woman lifted her head, tears shimmering. "You were scared," Naomi said. "And you're not alone. Many people freeze under toxic leadership. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." A tear fell down Bri's cheek. "You did the right thing when it mattered. And that's the beginning of growth." Bree didn't speak for a moment. She simply breathed, letting the reassurance settle in her bones. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on people like me." Naomi placed a hand gently over Bri's. "I'm not here to punish growth," she said softly. "I'm here to nurture it." Bri nodded, wiping her face. "If you ever need anything, even if it's scrubbing floors again, I'm in. I want to help fix what's broken." "That's all I ask," Naomi said. Bri left the office with steadier steps. An hour later, Naomi and Daniel reviewed the public statement. It was scheduled to go live at 9 a.m. But before that, Naomi insisted on one more thing. A press briefing. Not scripted, not staged. Just her standing in front of cameras telling the truth. Daniel hesitated. "The media will swarm. They might twist your words." "Let them try," Naomi said softly. "I won't." At 8:55, Naomi stepped onto the small stage set up in the corporate atrium. Cameras pointed at her. Reporters murmured. Passengers paused mid-walk, staring. Naomi approached the podium. A hush fell. She looked into the cameras not with anger, not with arrogance, but with a sincerity so clear it softened even the reporters' postures. "My name is Dr. Naomi Ellis," she began. "And yesterday, I boarded one of our flights as a regular passenger." The room stilled. What I experienced was painful, but it was also illuminating, because it showed me how far we've strayed from who we must be. She spoke slowly, deliberately. Every word, a quiet promise. "We will earn back trust. Not through slogans or campaigns, but through actions. Through dignity, through humility, through accountability." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Because truth, spoken gently, was louder than any microphone. Reporters lowered their pens. Passengers stood still. Some even placed a hand over their heart. Naomi closed simply with, "Yesterday was one flight. Today begins a new journey, and I intend to lead it with the humanity every passenger deserves." The room erupted in applause, not polite but heartfelt. For the first time since taking the CEO title, Naomi felt it. Not pride. not victory. Hope. That afternoon, as Naomi returned to her office, Daniel approached her with a small smile. You know, your approval rating hit 92% in an hour. Naomi chuckled. Let's hope they still feel that way when the reforms begin. Daniel nodded. They will. Because you're leading with honesty. Naomi looked out the window again at the planes, the people, the movement. This wasn't about one flight. It wasn't about the humiliation. It wasn't about punishment. It was about rebuilding an airline from the inside out, starting with the truth. And Naomi Ellis was exactly the woman to do it. The morning after Naomi's public announcement, the Falcon Air headquarters buzzed like a kicked beehive. Some employees walked with a sense of renewed purpose. Some whispered anxiously behind closed doors. Others moved stiffly, wary of what reforms might mean for them. Change, real change, always made the ground tremble. And Falcon Air was trembling. Dr. Naomi Ellis arrived early 6:15 a.m., carrying a stainless steel travel mug and a file folder tucked under her arm. She looked refreshed, but beneath her quiet composure lived 1,000 moving parts. Today was the day she would begin implementing the most drastic cultural shift Falcon Air had seen in decades. Her leadership team wasn't ready, but she was. As she stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor, a cluster of middle managers gathered near the hallway abruptly fell silent. Their faces said everything their mouths wouldn't. Fear, suspicion, resentment, curiosity. Every pair of eyes followed her as she walked by, though no one dared speak. She entered the main conference room, already occupied by senior management, all seated except for two men at the back whispering to each other. Naomi placed her folder on the table with a gentle thud. Good morning, everyone. A chorus of quiet replies followed. Daniel Mercer sat to her right, offering a small, encouraging nod. The HR director sat to her left, looking determined but tense. Captain Ross Alden joined via video from Denver's pilot lounge, his uniform immaculate, his presence steady as always. Naomi opened her folder. Let's begin. The room straightened collectively, some leaning forward, some bracing, a few sinking slightly into their chairs. Naomi scanned the table. I want you all to speak freely today. If you have concerns, voice them. If you disagree, say so. This is not a room for silence. The first voice came quicker than expected. Dr. Ellis, said a man from crew operations. Before we jump into plans, I need to say, people are scared. Really scared. Yesterday's termination shook the entire company. Naomi nodded. Change often does. But some are saying, he continued hesitantly, that you acted impulsively. Daniel stiffened beside her. Naomi didn't flinch. You're free to say what you've heard. The man swallowed. They think you fired Sheila without due process. She assaulted a passenger. Naomi replied calmly. She violated FAA regulations. She targeted me. Yes, but more importantly, she endangered safety. He hesitated. And some employees think, maybe you'll fire anyone who makes a mistake. Naomi softened her tone. I'm not here to punish mistakes. I'm here to address cruelty. There is a difference. Her words flowed like warm water, gentle but clarifying. Another manager spoke up, this time a woman from training and supervision. What exactly will these reforms look like? People are nervous because they don't know what's coming. Naomi clasped her hands together. Let me show you. She slid a document across the table. Beginning next quarter, we are implementing a 3-tier training overhaul. Mandatory, paid, and centered on dignity, conflict resolution, cultural competence, and mental health resilience. Someone in the back muttered, mental health? What does that have to do with service? Naomi raised an eyebrow. Everything. She let silence stretch for a few seconds, a deliberate pause, an invitation for thought. Crew burnout is one of the largest contributors to friction on board. When people don't feel supported, they lash out. And when they lash out, passengers suffer. The training manager nodded slowly. Another hand rose this time, from the regional ops lead, who oversaw the airport where Sheila worked. Dr. Ellis, the union is already calling. They want a meeting. They're not pleased. Naomi offered a measured breath. Of course they aren't. No union likes abrupt terminations. Do you want us to delay action until we negotiate? No, Naomi said. We will honor union processes, but safety and dignity are non-negotiable. Captain Ross spoke through the speaker system. If I may, Dr. Ellis is right. Pilots deal with union tension every day. But no contract protects someone from assaulting a passenger. No union can defend prejudiced behavior. The regional lead nodded, reluctantly conceding. Another manager pushed forward in his chair, this one older, with silver at his temples. Dr. Ellis, he said gently, we've seen CEOs come and go, many with big visions, many with promises. Some tried strict policies, some tried leniency. But most reforms don't last. Naomi held his gaze. Why do you think that is? He exhaled. Because they change rules. But they don't change people. Naomi smiled softly. Exactly. She stepped away from the table and walked to the windows overlooking the tarmac. Planes wove across the concrete like threads. The early sun glinted off metal wings. When I was on flight FA 219, she said, I didn't see a broken airline. I saw a broken trust. Between passengers and crew, between junior staff and senior staff, between employees and leadership. That is what we're repairing. She turned back to the room. And change starts with clarity. So, allow me to be clear. She placed both hands on the table's edge. No one will lose their job for showing humanity. No one will be punished for asking for help. No one will be silenced for wanting fairness. She straightened. But cruelty, discrimination, retaliation, and negligence, those things end now. The room shifted, some uncomfortable, some relieved, some emboldened. The HR director leaned forward. Dr. Ellis, employees will listen to you. They already admire your honesty, but they need support structures to succeed. Naomi nodded, which is why I'm creating something new. She lifted 3 envelopes from her folder. These are appointments to the new Dignity and Culture Council, a permanent body inside Falcon Air dedicated to monitoring service standards, investigating customer concerns, and supporting crew mental well-being. She handed the envelopes one by one. To HR, to operations, to training. These are the first members, but not the last. Daniel smiled. You're restructuring from the inside. Yes, Naomi said, because reform without roots doesn't last. But not everyone was convinced. The man from Crew Ops crossed his arms. With respect, Dr. Ellis, how do we know this isn't just a reaction to what happened to you? How do we know this isn't personal? A quiet stillness filled the room. Naomi's eyes softened, but her voice sharpened with purpose. It is personal, she said. The room stiffened. It's personal because I lived it, because I saw the fear in passengers' eyes, because I watched an elderly man tremble for 4 hours, because I watched good people like Brie Lopez freeze under toxic leadership. She stepped forward. It's personal because it should matter to everyone. No defensiveness, just truth. And truth, a quiet, steady truth, had power. The man looked down. I understand, he murmured. Naomi smiled gently. Then we moved forward together. The meeting continued, another hour refining training modules, discussing leadership oversight, mapping out short-term corrective actions. At the end, each person left with renewed clarity. Some still uneasy, some inspired, some cautious but willing. All changed, almost all. When the room finally emptied, only Naomi, Daniel, and the HR director remained. Daniel looked thoughtful. They're reacting better than I expected. Fear and hope often look alike at first, Naomi said quietly. The HR director hesitated before speaking. Dr. Ellis, there's something else you should see. She pulled up an email. A complaint, filed early that morning. Anonymous. But its message was unmistakable. Some of us think the CEO is exaggerating. This whole situation is being blown out of proportion. We didn't sign up to be babysitters. Naomi read the line slowly. Are you concerned? The HR director asked. Naomi exhaled softly. No. I expected resistance. You can't uproot a culture without shaking the soil. She placed the paper down gently. Forward it to me. Anonymous complaints deserve attention, but not fear. Daniel smiled. You're not losing momentum. I can't, Naomi replied. Not now. Later that afternoon, Naomi walked through the terminal alone, no entourage, simply observing. She watched a gate agent calmly help an elderly couple. She watched a crew member kneel to speak gently to a child afraid of boarding. She watched a young attendant offer water with genuine warmth. Or maybe she just noticed more now that compassion was on her mind. Her steps slowed near a window overlooking a departing Falcon Air flight. Families lining up, crew greeting them, a collective hope about to lift into the sky. A soft wave of emotion rose unexpectedly in her chest. Not sadness, not fear, something gentler, something healing. For the first time since taking the CEO role, Naomi felt that maybe, just maybe, the future she envisioned was possible. A future where dignity was not a slogan, not a rule, not a requirement, but a habit, a reflex, a way of being, and she would lead them there quietly, steadily, relentlessly. The journey was long, but she had already lived longer once. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks since Flight FA 219. 3 weeks since the internet erupted. 3 weeks since Falcon Air began the most significant transformation in its history. And in those 3 weeks, something remarkable had happened. People weren't whispering about the scandal anymore. They were talking about the change, about the reforms, about the leadership, about the culture shift happening in real time. But most of all, they were talking about her. Dr. Naomi Ellis, the woman who boarded a plane in quiet observation and walked off as the catalyst for an industry-wide awakening. It was late afternoon when Naomi stepped onto the outdoor terrace of Falcon Air headquarters, one of the few peaceful places where she could catch her breath. The sky stretched above her in an expanse of soft blues and faint golds, streaked by distant contrails of departing aircraft. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of traffic and the faint engine roars far below settle into a quiet rhythm. This job, this responsibility, it was enormous. But she was no stranger to weight. She had carried heavier burdens before. As she breathed in the crisp Denver air, footsteps approached softly. "Thought I might find you here," a familiar voice said. Naomi opened her eyes and turned. It was Captain Ross Alden, hat under his arm, uniform jacket slung across his shoulder, tired but warm around the eyes. "Captain," Naomi said, smiling. "Long day?" He chuckled. "Long week, but a good one." He joined her at the railing, looking out over the runway. "You know," Ross said, "for the first time in years, crew lounges feel different." He hesitated. People are talking about dignity, service, accountability. But not because they're afraid, because they're hopeful. Naomi nodded, deeply grateful for the words. "That was always the goal," she said softly. Ross studied her for a moment. "You've done more in 3 weeks than some CEOs do in 3 years." Naomi laughed quietly. "Let's hope I can keep going." "You will," Ross said with quiet certainty. "Falcon Air needed someone like you." She looked out at a Falcon Air plane lifting into the sky, its wings catching sunlight. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe Falcon Air just needed someone willing to listen." Later that evening, Naomi walked through the terminal alone. She liked doing that, observing from the ground level, not from an office chair, watching boarding lines, customer interactions, the rhythm of human movement. It reminded her why she took the job, why she couldn't lead from distance. As she passed gate B22, she noticed a young black woman behind the desk assisting a family whose connection had been canceled. Her voice was calm, her posture open, her words full of care. "I know you're exhausted," she told the mother. "Let me get you meal vouchers and seats together on the next flight. And don't worry, I'll stay here until everything's settled." Naomi paused, watching the moment unfold. This right here was the culture she wanted to build. The gate agent looked up and recognized her. She froze, then straightened. "Dr. Ellis, I didn't see you there." Naomi smiled. "You handled that beautifully." The young woman flushed with pride. "Thank you, ma'am. We're all trying. We've been through new training. It feels different. Better." Naomi nodded. "Keep leading like that. Small moments change everything." She walked on, her heart lighter. When she reached the far end of the concourse, her phone buzzed. A message from Bry Lopez. "Dr. Ellis, guess what? I just finished my first week of the new training rotation. I feel proud. I've never felt that before. Thank you for giving people like me a second chance." Naomi closed her eyes, moved. Bree had gone from fearful, shaky, unsure, to a woman rebuilding herself piece by piece. That was the true heart of change. Not the policies, not the press releases, the people. The individual transformations others might overlook. People becoming better not because they were scared, but because they were inspired. That same evening, Naomi returned to her office. A stack of envelopes sat on her desk, notes from passengers, employees, even other airlines executives. Some congratulated her, some thanked her, some shared pain from their own stories. She read every word. One envelope, however, caught her eye. It had no name, just a simple handwritten message on the front. For Dr. Ellis, from a fellow traveler. Inside was a letter, and Naomi sat down to read. Dear Dr. Ellis, I was on flight FA 219, the older man in 28, my daughter Emily, and I saw everything. And I want to tell you something I didn't get to say that day. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for every person who has ever been dismissed, talked down to, or treated as invisible. Watching you stay calm under cruelty taught me humility. Watching you speak up taught me bravery. Watching you forgive taught me grace. I've lived a long life. I've seen a lot of leaders, but very few have your strength, and even fewer have your compassion. I hope you know that what you did that day, and what you're doing now, will ripple far beyond an airline, far beyond a flight, far beyond any boardroom. You are changing the air we breathe, and I'm grateful to have witnessed the beginning. With respect, Walter Hayes. Naomi set the letter down, her throat tight, her eyes burning with emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel. Walter Hayes. The calm, steady voice during the storm had given her something she didn't even know she needed. Affirmation, recognition, grace. She closed her eyes and whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you, Walter." 2 weeks later, Falcon Air hosted a company-wide gathering, the first in years. Thousands attended in person. Thousands more tuned into the live stream. Naomi stood on the stage, not elevated above them, but among them. She wore no corporate armor, just a simple navy dress and steady eyes. When she stepped up to the microphone, the room hushed. 3 weeks ago, she began, I boarded a plane as a silent observer. By the end of that journey, I knew we had work to do. She paused, then smiled, warm, real, unforced. And today, I see an airline rising. The crowd stirred, hopeful. Naomi continued, we are not perfect. We will make mistakes. We will stumble, but we will stumble with dignity. We will learn with humility. We will lead with compassion. She looked across the room, faces young, old, weary, hopeful, and most importantly, she said, we will be human, with each other, for each other. A quiet wave of emotion swept through the audience. Naomi closed with a motto she had carried since that painful day. Dignity in every seat, on every flight. No exceptions. The room erupted into applause, not loud and wild, but deep and resonant. A standing ovation grounded in belief, not performance. Because they didn't just hear the words, they felt them. After the event, as Naomi left the building, she stepped outside to find a sunset spreading across the sky, lavender, amber, gold, like a horizon painted with second chances. The wind lifted the edges of her hair gently, and she whispered, this is just the beginning. Not for her, not for Falcon Air, but for every person who would ever walk onto a flight, hoping to be treated like they mattered, because now they would be. Because someone finally cared enough to insist on it. And because Dr. Naomi Ellis, the woman once mocked for speaking up, was now leading an airline toward the sky she always believed it could reach. A sky where dignity wasn't earned. It was guaranteed. The story crew laughs at black woman's complaint, then realize she was the airline's new CEO, reminds us of a familiar but sometimes forgotten lesson. Human dignity is not found in position or appearance, but in how they face adversity. Dr. Naomi Ellis, despite being treated badly, still chose calmness, chose dialogue, instead of responding with anger. It was this courage that exposed the truth and moved those around her. For older audiences, the lesson has a deeper meaning. In life, we have witnessed discrimination and hasty judgments that hurt. But time has also taught us that kindness, calmness, and the way we maintain dignity in difficult times are what truly make us valuable. The story also reminds us, never take anyone for granted because we do not know the journey they have been through or who they are beyond the surface. And finally, a story of hope. Even though the world can be unfair at times, there are always people strong enough to change it. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this emotional story. If the content touches you, if you feel this is a gentle reminder for yourself or someone else, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to bring more healing, humane, and profound stories. See you on the next journey.